Hello and welcome back to Focal Point on AFR Talk. This is your host, Clarence Frogman Henderson, sitting in for Brian Fisher. Actually, Debbie called the control room on the last break. My own wife doesn't even recognize my voice. So that's just how much I've been affected by whatever this bug is that's crawled into my throat. But I'm going to get some help in this next segment, someone else to share some of the airtime with me, and that is Doug Gregory. Doug is the Research and Communications Associate at the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. You are, of course, a listening audience, very familiar with our frequent guest here, Cal Beisner, Dr. Cal Beisner, who is our regular guest to talk about evangelicalism and environmentalism, and the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. You can go to cornwallalliance.org. Now, they're kind of our gurus when it comes to evaluating what's going on in the environmental movement from a biblical and evangelical perspective. And Doug Gregory from Cornwall Alliance here to help us do that today. Doug, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's great to have you on, Doug, and there are several things I wanted to touch base on with you. I received the weekly update from the Cornwall Alliance. You can sign up for this thing and encourage you to do it if you're interested in environmental issues. This is a source you can trust. Go to cornwallalliance.org. You'll be able to sign up for their weekly update right there on the home page. Doug, I don't know if this isn't what I want us to get into, but I don't know if you'd seen this story. I just came across it this morning from CBS Los Angeles, where there's a UC Riverside study out there that found that commercially cooked hamburgers cause more air pollution than diesel trucks. The guy is saying, look, an 18-wheeler diesel engine truck would have to drive 143 miles on the freeway to put out the same mass of particulates as a single charbroiled hamburger patty, talking about commercial charbroilers. I mean, that just sounds absurd to me. I mean, I'm springing this on you, Doug. I don't know if you got any reaction to that, but I just find that preposterous.
Well, I suppose it would be, I don't know if I find it so preposterous because they may not be taking into account that when you grill a hamburger patty, say at a barbecue, you're usually not just grilling one. You know, of course, like an economy of scale, when you have a whole bunch of charcoal, say you take a whole bag's worth of charcoal and you light that up and you burn it through to completion, and you use that to cook only one burger. Well, yes, then, of course, you're going to be using more fuel and putting more into the atmosphere for that one burger than perhaps a whole diesel truck. Although it would, you know, what really is amazing about that is not so much how much emissions are put out by the charcoal, but how efficient our trucks have become.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe the lesson there... Maybe the lesson there is we've got the trucks down. They can drive 143 miles on the freeway and put out very, very few particulates compared to what you get barbecuing up a burger.
Yeah, you know, ever since the 1970s, you know, the amount of emissions that have been produced by cars just because of the advent of the catalytic converter has gone down 95%.
Well, you know, and I've read too, Doug, that CO2 emissions are going down because of natural gas. It releases fewer CO2 and our CO2 emissions right now are down to about where they were in 1990.
Yes, that's correct. So. Although, unfortunately, part of the reason is because of the economic downturn. People have not been using as much energy as freely as they were beforehand. Although I'm still also glad to see that natural gas is reducing those emissions and doing so purely on a market basis.
Talking here with Doug Gregory, Research and Communications Associate at the Cornwall Alliance. Doug, a couple of things I wanted to turn our attention to here in the last 5 or 6 minutes we've got in our conversation. And speaking of food, we were just talking about charcoal burgers. Speaking of food, I'm looking at a study here led by Dr. Crystal Smith Spangler, researchers from Stanford University, my alma mater, and the Veteran Affairs in the Palo Alto healthcare system. And, you got this big discussion in the public about the difference between organic and regular foods, conventional foods, organic produce and meat, and comparing to conventional varieties. And the meme out there, Doug, is that organic food is way, way better for you, even though it's more expensive. It's way, way better. Well, what did this research done by Stanford and the Veterans Affairs in Palo Alto, what did they discover about the difference between organic foods and conventional varieties?
Well, what they discovered was that organically produced meat and vegetables, other types of produce, were not significantly different from each other with regard to their nutritional content, i.e. vitamins, minerals, macronutrients such as proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. There was no significant difference between the quote-unquote organic and quote-unquote non-organic, which itself is very difficult to define because organic is defined by government standards and not by a particular method. A book that I've been reading recently by a guy named Misha Popov, who was formerly a government organic food inspector, goes in and reveals a lot of this, that organic food is simply a lobbied term. It's not something that's based on studies. It's not something that's based on a different type of action and a different type of farming and agriculture in any way. It's simply got the right government stamp on it.
Well, Doug, it seems like, this article talks about the fact that organic foods can cost up to twice what conventional foods use that use pesticides and fertilizers, and that's the whole idea behind organic is do it without synthetic fertilizers, synthetic pesticides. But if there's zero nutritional difference virtually between the two, then it seems like we're getting to the point where organic foods is largely kind of a status symbol. It's not a matter of health anymore or nutrition. Now it's just kind of a status symbol, like people buying hybrid cars just to show others how cool they are.
Yeah, well, I would largely agree with you on that, especially given that if you look in the same report, what is discovered is that actually organic food has slightly higher levels of phosphorus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's interesting because phosphorus is one of the limiting factors in the growth of any sort of a plant. That's why fertilizers are usually composed of various forms of nitrogen and phosphorus, because they're lacking in the soil. And so for organic to have higher levels of phosphorus, it would seem that they would have to be having more fertilizer than the non-organic. Now, of course, since there's no consistent definition for organic, it's very difficult to tell which ones are which. But
the other thing I notice is it says that organic milk and chicken may also have more omega-3 fatty acids. Now, I got no idea what that is, but every time the word fatty is in there, I guess that's supposed to be bad. So it sounds like whatever that is, there's more of it in organic milk and chicken.
The omega-3 fatty acids are supposed to be correlated with good heart health. You get them a lot in things like salmon and organic eggs and things like that. And they're actually supposed to be good for your health. But too much of anything is not necessarily good for you. And the same is the case with omega-3 fatty acids. If you want to take an omega-3 fatty acid, supplement, well, you may actually end up taking too much at some point. So, it's not necessarily better to have more. Although, one interesting point that Mr. Popov states in his book, Organic, some forms of organic are naturally going to be better because more care and time and resources are put in them. That's why it costs more. Now, you may not have more nutrition. Perhaps you have only a small amount of change in the minutia of a particular vitamin or nutritional aspect. But, of course, any food that's had more time, more energy, more resources put into it is going to be better for you. It's also going to be much more expensive. And the question is, well, perhaps you want Kobe beef, for instance. Kobe beef is a very tender piece of beef. It also costs $60 a pound. Who's willing to pay that?
You're going to pay for
Very
it.
few Americans are willing to pay for that. Most people want their $5 a pound, top sirloin.
Yeah. Well, Doug, I want to shift our attention. We got just a couple minutes left, but I'm looking at a lengthy piece from the Daily Mail online over in the UK about what they are discovering about wind farms. I got just about 90 seconds. What are we finding out about wind farms and their impact on human health?
Well, as was similar to in the late 80s, they had sick building syndrome, where low-frequency noises were causing neurochemical imbalances in the brain because people can't sleep. They're always hearing this low-frequency humming at a constant rate, and it's not broken up. And it causes them to be unable to sleep, unable to concentrate, unable to think properly. And this becomes a stress disorder over time. Unfortunately, there are very few studies on it, although one is mentioned in the article that you have from the Daily Mail. But most of these are anecdotal pieces of information. However, we have thousands of them at this point. We call it wind turbine syndrome. People who live near wind turbines develop all sorts of stress disorders, higher levels of cortisol, weight gain, heart problems, as in blood pressure and atherosclerosis, and inability to sleep, depression, insomnia. All of these things are related back to stress disorders, which come from the frequent and incessant low-frequency humming from wind turbines.
And there's really, Doug, from what I understand from this article, there's really no solution to it other than to move away. You just have to get away from that low-frequency noise.
Well, yes, and that actually brings up another scary point, is what if in America they start enforcing these wind turbines on people through eminent domain?
Yeah. All right, Doug, well,
They're not going
listen.
to be able to escape them.
Listen, I got to let you go, Doug. We are out of time talking with Doug Gregory, Research and Communications Associate at the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. Doug, thanks for sitting in for Cal Beister. Great to have you on.